Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Institute for Personal Development, where total consciousness is the new frontier. Kriya Yoga is the union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices that initiate this process.
And good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. So good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing okay today. How about you?
I'm doing great on this beautiful, fabulous moon day. And I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And I want to just say happy belated Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Hope you all had a wonderful day yesterday. And today on The Voice of Yoga, we'll be talking about the operations of a functional family. Pleasant interaction, free from guilt, shame, anger, resentment, blame, emptiness, and boredom. Swami will explain how this union with the divine enables us to have health relationships, even with our mothers. Listen as we point out some of the pitfalls of the dysfunctional family. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. So join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance. Get the light in your soul and become a whole person in the adult stage. So, Swami, where should we begin? So let's talk about the operations of a functional family.
Yeah, the whole thing of becoming an adult. And a lot of what we talk about are why we aren't collectively experiencing the functional family is because we aren't collectively going through our points of passage and rites of passage. And we've lost a lot of meaning and purpose behind a lot of this ancient wisdom. And so one of the biggest themes in human development was the whole thing of separation from mother. And this isn't really your actual parent, because one of the things we always say is that mother is an archetype, it's a symbol, it's greater than equal to something. Sure, it's your actual parent, but it's so much more than that. It's the whole principle of manifestation. It's how we put things into form. It's how we protect that which we put into form, and also how we nurture it to sustain it. And when we are growing psychologically and spiritually, then our concept of the actual parent changes. Because one of the reasons why things are so dysfunctional today is because we have a tendency to compete for energy on a limited level, that we're not separating from the family playpen and connecting to something that would produce an expanded sense of self, that our sense of self is remaining relatively small. And when this happens, there's a kickback that comes from our unlived latent potential that we want to be a whole person, that we want to grow psychologically and spiritually. And so the relationship then with our actual parent becomes somewhat loaded. And just like we said in the opening, it becomes loaded with symptoms of guilt, shame, anger, resentment, blame, emptiness, and boredom, which is collectively typically where we are today. And especially a lot of the younger people today, they're just so angry out there, and they don't really understand, like, where is this coming from? So we have a tendency now, because again, coming from our Western therapeutic approach, we have a tendency to blame early upbringing. We blame mom and dad. We blame our teachers. We blame, as opposed to being able to separate from it dynamic, not an actual person, but this unconscious pattern that we come in with. To separate from instinct, appetite, preservation, and survival, required a process. And that's where we used to have rituals and ceremonies and ordeals and ascetic practices to assist us with this developmental process. But today we don't have any of that anymore. And so the tendency is that we continue to compete for energy on a very limited level, and we struggle with the undesirable symptoms of a dysfunctional family.
You were talking about, younger people today being angry, and of course you had mentioned that as one of the feelings earlier. So when we talk about the archetypes, the father, the mother, so on and so forth. So if somebody has this dysfunctional relationship with one of their parents, could it be if they just changed how they understand that relationship, that archetype, that they could in turn really make a leap in their own psychological well-being?
I think one of the things that we learned is that it's not just an intellectual accomplishment. Just understanding it may help somewhat, but it really requires us to change this pattern of our bodies so that we're not looking for mother, we're not looking for food, we're not looking for something visible and tangible to validate ourselves. Because, again, coming back to one of the things we always say is that our physical bodies have all the power. And the dynamics of all addictions, as anybody knows, that once you internalize an image and it becomes empowered by this unconscious pattern that I need something, then it becomes very difficult to overcome it just intellectually. So, again, the one-size-fits-all solution to most of these common problems that a lot of us are struggling with and creating havoc with the experience of the family comes from our inability to reconnect to this other source of sustenance that is expansive.
We have talked in previous shows about karma. So my question to you is, you have said in the past that we are the creators of what is going on right now in our particular lifetimes. So we pick and choose who we're going to have relations with, in our lifetime. So we've chosen our parents, we've chosen our siblings, we've chosen our the people that we're going to be with. So if we understand that there is a responsibility on us, that we have created all of this, there's got to be lessons in who we have brought into our lives.
Correct. And just like you had said, but sometimes we don't understand that we're shaping reality on different levels, that it might not just be a conscious choice. And the aspects of your reality that are unconscious are going to be unconscious or subconscious or karmic, which means that until you start to expand your mind and identify with these different functions of the mind, then we're going to kind of feel like victims at this point, because these are the aspects of our reality that we don't realize that we're creating, because they're unconscious or karmic.
So do you think it would help if people took themselves out of the passenger seat and then into the driver's seat? They could understand that, on some level, what you just said, on some level, I ordered all of this. Now it's up to me to, to be able to understand, what this all should mean to me. And by analyzing maybe birth charts and things like that, would that help somebody to analyze if they're in some kind of a toxic family relationship? Could it actually help them to overcome that?
Well, it could give them the insight. And then, of course, if you have a metaphysical or a mystical system that will help you develop willpower and your psychological organs so that you can gain more and more control over how you're thinking on a conscious level, then that insight could prove to be very helpful. But without having the hardware, the ability to control how we think, the ability to be more detached or objective in these relationships, then it can become also prove to be very frustrating. And so one of the things that I think is really more important is to develop your psychological organs, to employ things like discipline, so that your conscious mind can handle influences, because that's what typically happens in these intimate and interpersonal relationships, is that they're emotionally charged. Where somebody will all of a sudden say something and it pushes your button. It sets you off. It sets off this complex that you have that, like we had said, runs much deeper than just this lifetime sometimes. And it brings up a lot of stuff. And the more acquainted you are with that, the better equipped you are to understanding it. And, of course, if you have the hardware, then, of course, you can start to identify and integrate. And what that does is that it puts you more in a position of personal strength, and you're no longer reacting to these circumstances and situations, that you have a little bit more distance from it. And you also recognize that whatever it is that somebody's doing that at some point could actually be infuriating you, you have more objectivity about it. You don't condone bad behavior, but you are compassionate, and you recognize that competing for energy on a limited level isn't fun, and that your inner environment is cycling through those symptoms that we were talking about earlier, the guilt, the shame, the anger, the resentment, the blame, the emptiness, and the boredom. And we have varying degrees of what we call normal for that regressive cycle. But what I notice is that we really don't have good leadership in how to get out of it and how to join with this resource that makes you a whole person.
Well, I think we're going to pause right there to hear a word from our sponsors. So, listeners, we'll be back with you in a few moments. And at that time, I will probably open up the phone lines to see if you have any questions for Swami about our Mother's Day. We'll be back in a moment.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachat.
If you are looking for a Samadhi-based experience, IPD Kriya Yoga has the goods. A complete yoga program that includes the practices and the process. Starting with the separation from Mother, including the labors and tasks of the hero and the return as a whole person. Practice makes perfect only when practice is whole. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. Samadhi, or total consciousness, is experienced by knowing and doing with devotion. Call or click now and get started. 603-929-0303 or www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
And welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So at this time, we're opening up the phone lines. If you have a question for Swami, you can ask it at any time. Okay, so Swami, let's go back. I have some more questions to talk to you about in my notes. So we talk a lot about the female principle, and then and now we're talking about the archetype of mother. So if a woman, say for example, for myself, I don't have any children, so I don't have this, the mother archetype. But because I'm female, does that mean that we are already born into that that kind of archetype just because we're female? And it's like women are always known to be, we're supposed to be nurturing, we're supposed to be all of these things. Is there a connection with that? Can we have one without the other, or do they come together as a pair?
Well, to answer your question, when something manifests, it manifests in half, and then it leaves behind a complementary, unmanifested other part. So a lot of times we may identify with the complementary, unmanifested other part as opposed to the manifested part, which could lead to some degree of confusion, because sometimes you are a woman and yet you don't have this longing to have children, and you doesn't mean that you are less of a woman. It just means that you identify more with the complementary, unmanifested other part.
So we can still, whatever our roles are in this particular lifetime, however we came in, male or female, we can still exercise those parts of the archetype, even though we don't necessarily, I can still have compassion and nurture even though I'm not a parent.
Oh, absolutely. And you can give birth to things like ideas. It doesn't necessarily always have to limit it to an actual child. And so in that respect, you can actualize this principle of manifestation, putting things into form. And a big part of the Kriya Yoga is being able to expand your identity, to open up and assimilate all of these different facets of our makeup. And that's a big part of what becoming a whole person is all about. But just like you had mentioned earlier, that, the male-female thing, just in general, in Kriya Yoga isn't limited to gender, but their principles, right? Because I always remember, and we talk about the whole thing of years ago when the Baptist Church reinstated the doctrine, the woman must be subservient to the man. And students would come in here and they were irate, mostly women. And what do you think about this? And my response was that, it's wisdom, it's in the Bible. But I don't agree with the Baptist interpretation that the Bible isn't telling you that your road to enlightenment is to train your wife to get you the paper. What it is saying, though, is that whether you're a man or a woman, that your feminine principle must be subservient to your masculine principle, that intelligence must override emotion, feeling. And that becomes a platform that will enable you to start to move forward, provided that you program your conscious mind with a principle-centered value system. Because that becomes the bridge to the progressive cycle.
It's interesting that you mention that, because as you're saying it, I'm picturing a person in my own world that seems to have the opposite, seems to have a lot of this masculine principle and doesn't have, the female principle. This particular person, he's very intellectual and doesn't have any of these female characteristics or attributes. So then again, doesn't there have to be some kind of a balance? You have to be able to express, emotions, whatever that is, but you have to be intelligent about it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things we always say is that intelligence without the benefit of feeling is void of passion or compassion. But feeling without the benefit of intelligence is perilous. So it's not one or the other, that we actually integrate both. And that's one of the things that I think is so unique about the system of yoga we teach, is that we, in our asana program, we use salutation to the moon and salutation to the sun. The salutation to the moon is what opens up the path of descending prana, which pulls you into your feelings, pulls you into the feminine principle. And salutation to the sun puts you into intelligence and your masculine principle.
So it's really kind of up to us to have this awareness when we're practicing our salutations to the moon and salutation to the sun. If we have this intellectual awareness of what we're doing, does that make the practice that much more powerful?
To answer your question, it does. Energy follows mind. The more mentally engaged you are in whatever it is that you're doing, the more you will draw the life force towards you, which will exponentially start to increase the return that you're trying to get on your efforts.
I noticed in our notes, I just took a quick look on our notes, and we have a note on here to talk about the Oedipus complex. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, the whole Oedipus complex was the whole thing of the boy married to mother, which is an interesting myth, dynamic, that with the boy, which is a Mercury image, the conscious mind, when it is joined with instinct, appetite, preservation, and survival, it implies that there was no separation. See, the whole separation myth and the whole separation theme is such an important part in development, that we have to separate not from our actual parent, but from this pattern that we come in with. And that's not an easy task to do, because all the forces are in favor of you staying connected. But then, of course, you create this Oedipus complex. And all the girls snicker, of course, the boy married to mom, but it really isn't a gender-sensitive condition. It's if your conscious mind is being controlled by this unconscious pattern, then that's the exact same dynamic. It's the dynamics of any real addiction, right? Because an addiction is emotionality without the benefit of intelligence. That you're controlled by forces that are beyond your scope of power, that the conscious mind never separated from these influences. And a big part of the Kriya Yoga that we teach is we educate people in how to seamlessly basically connect to something that's going to give you a better return on your effort without having to go through a lot of the abstinence and the struggle that most people try and do.
Well, and I think that's part of the bigger problem is this feeling that we're all struggling. And, what do we do first? Do we have to realize that we, have a problem? Isn't that the AA thing? You got to understand you have a problem first before you can go ahead and then try to find remedies to fix that problem. So when we're talking about this mother-father archetype, it's like, should we be looking in our own world to see, well, what is it that's really kind of missing? And then from there we can employ strategies to start including certain behaviors or certain things into our world?
I think that would be a good place to start. And the other thing I think that you really have to recognize is that we are all codependent, that we all have needs, and also that there is a secret to life. This concept of using your number one need as the symbol that you now turn to for validation is where growth starts to take place. Anything else was what they called the sin. It missed the mark. And so a big part of, just like what you said, recognizing that we don't come in looking for the life force. We come in, we look for food, mother, and approval. And that pattern is what we have to rewrite. That's the one we have to change.
So then does it come down to those three words that you always say, kind of the crux of it all, and that's put God first?
Well, exactly. But of course, they're just words that just roll off your tongue, but what does that look like when I'm doing it? What does it look like when I love the Lord thy God with my heart, my soul, and my mind? Especially when you read Scripture, and one of the biggest things they're constantly referring to is false gods. That you're drawing from the wrong energy field, but you think you're spiritual.
Well, I guess it's almost about that time that we got to start closing down our program. So, in closing, I'd like to invite you listeners out there to visit our website. You can follow Swami on Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook, of course. Be sure to visit the website. Again, that address is www.ipdtransform.com. Once there, you can post comments about this show or any other ideas for shows you may want Swami to consider. And keep those comments, questions, and curiosities coming because Swami does enjoy hearing from you. Be sure to tune in next week. I believe we're going to discover the full moon that's going to happen next week. And if you have any questions about what's going on with that, you can email me at lisa@ipdtransform.com with any questions you may have for Swami to answer. So, Swami, any other final thoughts or points you want to make about today's show or next week?
Well, I would like to wish everybody a belated Happy Mother's Day, and that's the actual parent level of it. I don't want to try and undermine the importance of being a parent here, but I think sometimes it's really helpful to see the deeper myths that are supporting these roles that we assume in a particular incarnation. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste, and I'll give it back to you.
And thank you. And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.